Welcome to week 2. In this lecture, Understanding MARC XML, we will explore the basics of MARC XML. For those of you with cataloging knowledge or experience, this session will be a breeze for you. If not, don't worry, this session will still be a breeze for you too. This lecture is meant to give a basic understanding of MARC records and their structure as MARC XML. It is not meant to be a cataloging course, and you will not be quizzed over cataloging specifics, though you will get the chance to make a few simple MARC XML records in the near future. So MARC stands for Machine Readable Cataloging, and the MARC standards are a set of digital formats for the description of items cataloged by libraries. MARC formats are still the national standard for the dissemination of bibliographic data in the US, despite new and evolving standards and concepts such as linked data. There are different variable data fields within MARC records, which range between 0 to 900. Each set consists of a number range that focuses on a particular metadata topic. These are the MARC tags you saw in some previous lectures, and you might be familiar with from your other courses, as well as using the catalog yourself. Each category has a broad scope of topics it covers. These are all about describing the resources. So they're broken up into different areas you're describing about the resource, such as its title, what it's actually about, going on with the subject headings, notes about its physical appearance and how that information is carried, and so on. You don't need to have these memorized or anything. This is just a great reference to have for when you are working with MARC records or MARC XML. So why do you need to know about MARC XML? Well, first you need to know about it for this course, but more importantly, you need to know about MARC because every library uses MARC. MARC has been around a while, and here's why. The schema is flexible. It's also simple. It is ideal for data conversion, such as crosswalking into another schema. There's a lossless conversion of MARC to XML, meaning that the traditional MARC format translates perfectly to MARC XML without sacrificing standards, structures, or content. The data presentation is both human and machine readable. MARC editing is simple through the use of basic tools like an XML editor or MARC Edit. And validation of MARC data is simple. You simply follow the cataloging rules and standards while linking your schema to your XML up at the top. Overall, MARC XML structure is pretty simple. Well-formed, valid MARC XML will include a declaration, as always, XML declaration up at the top, followed by the namespace, declaration, schema instance, schema location, and then all the elements, attributes, and values. This is just a little refresher from the previous lecture, and this is just going to be what you learned in the last session, but in reference to MARC records. Let's take a look at the structure of a MARC XML record. You're introduced to these categories earlier, the namespace declaration, the schema instance, and schema location. After you have all of that defined, then you jump into all of your metadata in the MARC fields. So let's take a minute to look at MARC XML structure and validation. It's pretty simple, just like any other schema. There will be certain criteria a document must meet in order to be valid. As usual, the namespace is required, or the declaration, and then your namespace, which states that you will be using MARC. And then you have your schema instance and schema location. The MARC schema consists of predefined elements and attributes that you can use. You cannot create your own additional elements or attributes. For example, you cannot use record simply like this. You have to have MARC record like up here. Following the declaration and schema information are the elements. In MARC XML, MARC tags are constructed as elements. MARC record elements include the following: MARC leader, and then the MARC control field, and then MARC data fields. In the green boxes down here, we can see that we have our elements. In this second element, the control field, we also have an attribute. That attribute is the tag, and its value is which tag it's referring to. In this case 001, which is usually a system number. Then we have our value of it in here. So this is how you will structure your elements and their values within MARC. Following the namespace, declarations, and MARC leader and control fields, MARC records will contain MARC data fields. These carry the bulk of a record's metadata. They can also have MARC subfields, which contain additional metadata about those tags. Here you can see that once again in the green we have our elements followed by our attributes, and you can have more than one attribute up here. The first attribute is saying that the MARC tag is 245, which is statement of responsibility. It includes basically the most important information about a resource, and then we have its indicators. And following that, we have our subfields, which include additional attributes which define other aspects about the 245, more information about the resource. So we have our title in this first subfield. Second subfield, we have the volume number, which goes along with this title, and so on. We also have our electronic resource format, stating what kind of format this is in, as well as our editor, or you could have an author here. This resource only has an editor, though. As we just saw, MARC elements have attributes. These attributes define which MARC tag is being used. They also define which indicators are being used. Subfields can also have attributes that are describing delimiters. Those are the subfields, like we saw the volume number and the editor and resource format and so on. Once again, we have the elements in the green boxes. We have the attributes defined in the blue boxes, and specifically over here in the red box, we have the subfields, which are the delimiters, which are describing the 245 field. Now that you've been introduced to MARC tags and fields, let's take a look at some more details you need to know about those. MARC XML attribute values are predefined in the schema. You can only use the predefined elements. You cannot create your own or change their structure. They must be encoded as 3-digit numbers. Even if you're just referring to the MARC tag 1, it really needs to be formatted as 001. Similarly, you can't just have 03, you need 003. And if you do not use the 3 digits, as I did in this 005 tag, which is valid and acceptable, does not have the red line under it. The other two, which are not formatted with 3 characters, or 3 numbers, will have the red line under them, and your Oxygen XML editor will tell you that you cannot use that within the schema. It's not legal within the schema. If you add those other zeros, then it will be valid and your code will be good to go. Now that we talked about MARC elements and attributes, let's step back and take a more in-depth view at the types of elements that are allowed in the MARC schema. There are 2 main types of elements that I mentioned, the control fields as well as the data fields. Both can have MARC subfield elements as well, as we saw earlier. Control field elements are reserved for 6 fields. The 001, 003, 005, 006, 007, and 008. These fields encode information about the record, such as its system number, character count, and positioning, and other encoded data that is more or less machine readable. It's more for the machine to interpret than library users looking at these records. They cannot be used with any other field. The control fields are limited to the 6 fields listed here. If you accidentally use a control field in place of a data field, the Oxygen XML editor will alert you that you cannot use it because it is an undefined element. It would not be valid, and you would have to correct it from a control field to a data field. But if you make that mistake, then like I said, the MARC or the Oxygen XML editor will alert you, and you'll be able to fix that small mistake. For the data fields, that's basically the bulk of the record. Everything else is carried in there. This is where you start describing the resource, who made it, what it is, what it's about. its extent, how many pages it has, and so on. All of the metadata will be in the data fields. So let's take a look at an example. This example is a pretty brief record, but it has a lot of good fields, and it is well-formed and valid within the MARC XML schema. So this will be a great reference for this lecture, as well as some other assignments in other parts of this course. So right now, let's take a look at this record. So in this sample record, up here we have our XML declaration, and then we have our MARC namespace, followed by our MARC schema instance, and finally the schema location. Remember, this is what the computer is checking to make sure your code is valid, to make sure it follows all of the syntax rules and structure. Up here, we begin our code with our root element, the MARC collection. Within this collection, you have records, and then within each record, you have metadata. We have our leader here, and then we have our control fields. Remember, there are only a few fields you can use this for, and we have covered them. After that, you get into some information about the actual resource. We can start describing it. And I'm not going to break all these down for you. I have a resource included in the module where you can look through at more depth what each of these tags means. But for now, I just want to show you the structure and the syntax. So everything is nested properly. We see over here in our green box, everything is good to go. All of the elements are structured properly, as are the attributes. We have the MARC data fields, followed by the attribute and the values of the attributes. In this case, 035 is a MARC tag for the OCLC number, and then encoded here in a subfield, we have the OCLC number. And that's the same for pretty much all of these. You have your tag, and then they have their indicators, and then you have the subfields, which further describe the, in this case, the 245, which ends up describing your resource. So you have all your metadata nicely encoded in here, and then you have your ending tags saying that all of your fields, all of your metadata tags are full and valid, and then your record has come to an end, as well as your collection. So this is a great short example. This is in Canvas. You can take a look at this more in depth on your own. And now we'll go back to the lecture in 1 second. Oh, so I'm sorry, I passed it. Congratulations! You can now read and write your own MARC XML records. Be sure to review the documentation for Assignment 1, which is due on Sunday the 22nd at 11:59, so you have some time. The assignment asks you to create a couple brief MARC records, which you will use for future assignments. There will be a template to help you out, so again, don't stress over learning every little detail about cataloging. Just focus on what is enclosed in the assignment details. But before you do that, you also want to check out Lecture 2.2, which is on XPath. And just a reminder, we have our usual weekly quiz due by Sunday.